Welcome to Terror Tales Volume 3.
Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed these stories.
This is Terror Tales of Mustache Cash Dash, Volume 3. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
I'm going first. Yeah. I don't know what else to say besides that, but I'm going first, so. Terror Tales of Mustache Cash Dash 2023. Now, this story, as not scary as it might be, is based on the myth of Dracula. All this work is based on fiction, and anything depicting real people is either exaggerated or joked. Let's go for a walk in the forest, Nick suggested, after being bored from playing video games all night. We were in the basement, and it was very dark out, and it started to rain. But it's super dark, I said. But it's super dark, baby, Nick mocked, responding. I went silent, looking at Joe, who had just finished up editing a new video. As much as I usually agree with Hudson on this, let's go for a walk. What's the worst that could happen? Joe asked. Word. Okay, cool, Nick said. They both got out of their seats and walked up to the back door of the basement. I was left in the quiet room. The night was still young, so I continued to play Son of the Gods Armageddon. Then the power went out suddenly. The dogs began barking, but the parents weren't home. Well, I said to myself, stretching as I stood up. The room was so dark that I had to use my phone flashlight to walk around it. Going up the stairs to slowly open the creaky door, I felt like I was in a horror film. Bats flew over my head. I looked around for anything to know where the others went off to. A light flashed in the woods. As I walked towards it, I stepped all over the branches, snapping them in two. I finally started seeing a body shape, and it was Joe. Joe had his phone flashlight on. I continued walking towards him, to immediately step into a mud pile and get my shoes absolutely destroyed with muck. What is this, the third pair? I asked myself. There you are, man. Why didn't you walk on the side like the both of us? Joe asked. I didn't see any way around at the time. I just wanted to get to you guys. The power went out. Where's Nick? I asked, nervously shaking suddenly. Perhaps it was cold or I was scared. I couldn't tell. He's up there, Joe said, pointing up to a tree Nick had been climbing. Dude, be careful, I yelled up to Nick. He's fine, seriously, Joe said to me. As soon as we heard a grunt, Nick went flying down, landing on his feet, folding his ankle. Holy Nick said, breathing through his teeth. Oh my god, I said as my eyes widened. Dude, gnarly, Joe said, sort of wincing. I'm fine. I've had worse done to me. Nick clearly still grimaced at the sight of his ankle. I handed him a huge, large stick enough for walking. Here, this is a good enough stick for walking. I handed it to Nick. We all looked at each other and nodded, trudging through. We heard growls from the woods. Nick and Joe looked back at me. No running. You go first, mister. I'm desensitized to horror, Joe harmlessly joked. I felt nervous and anxious about going forward. I ended up laughing it off and continuing on until the growl turned to a scream of horror. I gulped loudly in fear. Now can we run? I asked. Yes, Nick and Joe simultaneously said, both taking off in a charged sprint. I followed not far behind them. I tripped and went flying into the dirt. They both looked behind themselves. Go! I'll meet you guys back in the basement, I screamed as the winged creature attacked me. I only felt a bite to my neck before it ran off. It didn't even hurt that bad. I just kind of got up and shook it off the dirt. I walked back to the basement door and all the lights had been turned on again. Guess the power's back, I said, walking downstairs and shaking the dirt off. Dude, what happened? Joe asked. I simply got hit with a few twigs. Maybe the growl was a car starting or something. I shook off the question, trying to steer away from it. I went to the bathroom and cleaned off my glasses, noticing no difference from when I took them off or put them on. I questioned it a bit before putting them back on. We talked more about videos ideas and seemed to brush off what happened. I think I'm gonna go home, I said. Not a bad plan. Just make sure to wake up at 10 a.m. to film, Nick shouted up the stairwell. I heard him and closed the door. I walked out to my car, opened the door, and left for home. The night was dark. The roads were rough. I could feel my head spinning. I continued to drive. After safely pulling into the turnaround, I was rather surprised. As I walked closer to my house door, I lost consciousness. I woke up the next morning at Nick and Joe's house. It was dark out. The top of the trees began to glow, clearly the sun reflecting through the leaves. Where am I? I said to myself, blinking. My glasses were shattered next to my head. Dude, why are you here so early? What happened to you? Joe said, opening the door, spotting me, with my chest heaving as I lost of breath, watching the light grow brighter past the leaves. The sun, it's coming. I can't move. Please help me, I whispered out. Joe's eyes widened, watching me just struggle where I was, and whistled. Lucy, his giant St. Bernard dog, rushed over and grabbed my arm gently, and Joe led her to the shop. All right, start explaining, Joe said. He showed some fear, but clearly was worried for my health. Where's Nick? I asked, looking around. He's still sleeping. He's up till 2 a.m. editing the new video. Okay. Then we will have to keep this between us then. I think I'm a bat. Joe looked shocked and began laughing. A bat? Dude, I'm sure you're not a bat. You don't have wings or anything. Let me explain. I cut him off. Last night we ran into the woods. I was bit, and I think it was by a bat, I said, scratching my neck. Do you have a mark there? I only can see something that looks like a scar, Joe said. Okay, how about my eyes? I can see perfectly without my glasses now. I opened my eyes, showing off my blue eyes now with a faint redness in them. My pupils dilated differently as well. They were slits. Whoa, that is strange, Joe said, looking at my eyes with a flashlight. Well, there's no doubt that there's something going on. Either way, if we go outside, we will need to securely cover you. Don't want you to get burned. Lucy barked in agreement. I licked my lips looking at her. My eyes flashed red as I attempted to leap after Lucy, baring my teeth and fangs. I stopped myself before it was too late. I began to break down. My eyes felt tears welling up in them. Joe didn't react harshly or worried about Lucy. It was rather that he knew my heart wouldn't hurt her. Well, that settles that. You're definitely not human anymore, Joe said. That's what I was afraid of. I need to keep my humanity. I don't want to lose my soul. Nick woke up, barging into the room with a pink-looking drink in a glass bottle, seemingly joyous. Are we ready for filming? Nick asked, as he suddenly looked at Joe and I. We think Hudson's a vampire, Joe said to Nick, who looked perplexed. Well, okay, not quite what I was hoping to hear, but still kind of cool. I guess that throws our plans off a little bit today, he said, looking at us. My head began to throb bad as I heard the voice, "Return to me," repeated to me countless times. Worthless of such power. Return it back to me. Return my power you stole from me, it repeated. Get out of my head. Get out of my head. Get out of my head, I yelled, and began throwing things around the shop, lobbing a big metal beam at Nick, and I began to transform, turning into something more scarier than a beast that I was, sprouting large ears and fangs as well as claws and finally wings. Nick caught the beam effortlessly and swung it around, whipping it and pointing at my beast form. Hey, give my friend's body back, he said, whacking me on the head. Ouch! I'm still in here, dude, I shouted as I felt my body ruthlessly being deformed in the shape of a vampiric form. A voice keeps shouting in my head, inside me, telling me to return its power, I calmed down and described. It could be the bite. It could very well be legit powers surrounding your form, Nick explained, as Joe was scoping around my new form. None of my clothes were ripped. It was just a strange sight. A beast of this form would usually be a bit bigger. My body transformed back to my human body. I feel like this can't be too bad. Your body is handling the transformation just fine, surprisingly. Usually you'd expect bad shit to happen, Joe said, as he walked over to his workstation, welding the beam Nick had into a sharp weapon like a metal fork. I think the best that we can do is, Joe started to say, hunt the beast that turned you this way. Nick finished Joe's sentence. As we prepared, I tried out my new form, being able to strike with even more force than ever. I was able to break trees down, shrink myself, and more importantly, turn invisible for a little time. I'm coming for you. 6 p.m. sharp, the voice from earlier in my head said. What the? Guys, he's after me. At 6 p.m. he'll arrive, I said. My voice was shaky, thinking of who it could be. We should set up traps, Joe said. We all agreed and began propping up spikes and marbles on the stairs. We didn't know which entrance he'd come by, so we set up countless traps around the entrances, and Joe wielded a sword that he forged himself, while Nick had a giant metal bow staff. I had boxing gloves on. Suddenly, the voice returned. What year is it? I lied and told him the first year that came to my mind. 1979. You made a terrible mistake, boy. You'll never see me coming. What the? Why'd you say that? Nick asked, Specifically 1979, he asked. It was the first year to come to my mind. The movie Alien came out. There's a knock at the door. What time is it? Asked Joe. It's 5:59, Joe responded. Then it can't be him, Nick said, opening up the door, avoiding the traps. To his surprise, the 39th President Jimmy Carter was at the door. Hi, my name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm here hoping to use the bathroom, the man said. Sure, Joe said. Sure what? The man replied. Use the bathroom, so I can? Yes, you can go. Nick and I leaped over the counter, grabbing Joe by his mouth. Don't you know vampires can only come in if you invite them in, Nick explained. We all readied our weapons, and the former President Jimmy Carter walked through the doors. Lucy ran after him. But we didn't even invite you in, I told him. That's a lie. We just want to be polite. What the? I said, leaping back as Lucy grabbed his arm and bit tightly. Youch! Stupid mutt, he said, shaking her off. She safely ran back to Joe's room. We wailed the weapons on him, beating him up. His disguise faded, sharing his Nosferatu-looking face. Nosferatu? We all questioned at the same time. Yes. Now please stop beating me up. I just want my powers, he said, starting to tear up. No, they're mine, I said. But I'd rather be fully human than half. I think you're already less than half. Ha ha ha. Nosferatu laughed. We all laughed, and the vampire sucked my power back out of me. This won't be the last time you see of me, he said, taking a step outside. The sun, it's back already? And burned to a crisp. We returned to our regularly scheduled programming, filming a video about how I became a vampire and becoming famous and rich. Now, please, don't go running into the woods hoping for this to happen, as you probably will contract any of the following: rabies, histoplasmosis, salmonellosis, urcinosis, and external parasites, and possibly die. The end.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter!
Oh, that was good. You're right. I had no idea that you were gonna do like an old school vampire.
Yeah.
parody.
I thought your dialogue was really good.
I don't know.
Jimmy Carter? No, I don't. It can't be. Actually, wait a minute.
I'm looking up right now. He was a 39th.
Oh, good job.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Wow, you knew it? All right,
Yeah.
good call, dude. The 4D ride. It's a cool October evening, only a week till Halloween, and Nick, Joe, and Hudson decide to attend a fair. That's the address on the flyer, so it should be just around the corner, Joe says, waving the colorful piece of paper around. Last time we got free tickets to something, we couldn't even get in with them, Hudson mentioned from the back seat of Nick's car. But Nick got those free tickets. I'm telling you, the poster board at the farmer's market would not lie, Joe added defensively. There it is, Nick said, quelling the argument and directing everyone's eyes to the large array of tents, stands, and rides ahead of him. There were flashing lights, plenty of people, and just enough parking space for them to find a spot within a minute. The entire area was lit up with a festive joy, a mix between the harvest season and a mild-mannered take on Halloween fright. As they stepped out of the car onto the familiar dirt and gravel of the fairground parking lot, the sense of fried food wafted by them, lifted into the air and carried away from the vendors of caramel corn, hot dogs, poutine, funnel cakes, and the like. The music of rides, games, and happy people washed away any remembrance of the bickering, and they set their eyes forwards, heading towards the front gate. Hi, Joe said, a little awkward to the sour-looking ticket lady. So I have this flyer I got, and just hand it over and it's free. He did, and turned to smile showily at Hudson and Nick as the woman added it to a pile of flyers beside her. Stick out your hands for me, she said. When they presented her with their hands, they were each given a faint red stamp in the shape of a jack-o'-lantern. This covers entry. Rides, games, and food are paid for at the vendor. Have a nice night. Suddenly, she didn't seem so sour. They all thanked her as they passed by and entered. Well, should we just wander around and see what's here before we dive into anything? Nick offered to the group. I agree, we should, Hudson said. Sure, Joe added. And just like that, they started making their rounds. They walked through the whole place, seeing all the little games, ring toss, dart throwing, water guns, all the shops, shirts and clothing, cheap toys, as seen on TV products, and specific salesmen for electric bikes and recliners that always seemed out of place at these types of events. They couldn't miss the ever-present food and drinks, or avoid the looming rides that none of them would go on. Eventually, they all stopped to eat. Hudson got a cheeseburger, Joe got a bowl of poutine, and Nick found himself a shawarma on gluten-free pita bread. After that, they headed to a corn maze. Well, that was all right, Joe said. I wish it was a little longer. They could have had a cool design in it too, Hudson pitched in. I liked it, Nick said. What do you want to do now? We've been here for like an hour and a half, and I don't think there's much else to do. We could go home now, Joe said. Hudson looked between them silently, and then said, I'd be fine with that. If we leave now, we could watch a movie after. He continued to look between them as they stewed on the idea. All right, let's go home. Nick started walking down the row towards the parking lot, which was still quite a ways away. The others followed. After only a minute, Joe called out, Look at that! He was pointing towards some of the rides. The fun house? Hudson asked. No, next to it. It's a 4D ride. We should go on it, he exclaimed. Sorry, man. By rule, I don't go on fair rides, Nick said. Oh, come on, man. I don't either, but look, it's just a screen and some seats. It's not going to fall apart and kill us. Hudson looked over at the crane that was violently swinging people around, and then back to the plywood and spray paint entrance of the 4D ride. The sign formed the roof of the entrance archway read, Experience the fourth dimension, in sloppy, ghoulish letters. After a moment of consideration, Nick gave in. All right, I'll go on it, but only if that doesn't happen to me. He pointed at the rest of the arch that had a roller coaster and a Grim Reaper painted onto it as they walked in. The tunnel led right to another ticket taker, this time a man with greasy hair poking out from under a baseball cap. You folks want to ride the ride? He cracked an unsavory smile. Yep. How much? Joe asked, eagerly the first in line to get his ticket. That'll be $4 a person. He spoke in a deadpan voice, the type you only get from working a job you hate. Joe turned a little, but realized he was too far to back out now. He pulled out his wallet and paid the man. Just head right in and take a seat. He opened the curtain next to him and let them in, one at a time after they had paid. Inside the dimly lit room were 3 chairs. They were black and looked like ordinary reclining chairs. They were positioned a couple feet in front of a projector screen that took up the whole wall. Aside from that, the room was empty, walled in by black curtain and floored by black painted plywood. Hudson looked around and didn't see a projector in the room before a message was displayed on the screen. It said, Please take your seat and don't forget to buckle up. So they did, and they were surprised to find that the seats actually did contain seat belts and buckles. As soon as they all clicked in, the screen changed. It was footage of a roller coaster. They all paid attention to the screen as it began to move, and the small fans mounted on the headrest blew on them. They went up high onto the top of a section of track, then slowing to a stop, dangling right before a great drop. The cart on the screen launched forward and went into a loop before passing over some water, where they were promptly sprayed in the face with water. Oh God, I got some in my mouth, Joe said, spitting as much as he could out. Hudson broke out laughing like a lunatic until the ride got to a halt at the end and started playing generic "Goodbye and come again" screen. Well, that was extremely lame. Thanks for wasting our money. Nick looked right at Joe as he said this. Look, I had no way of knowing it would be this lame. That sucked, Joe put up. I can't even get the seat unbuckled. I hope it's not broken, Hudson said as he fumbled with the buckle. Me neither, Joe said as he yanked the strap away from his body and watched it promptly tighten back down. I don't think I can get out yet. The projector faded and turned off, leaving them in total darkness. Great. Now we have to yell for the ticket guy or something, Nick said snidely. Just then, the seat shot forward, taking off in a burst, tearing through the screen before them, but only flying into more darkness at a speed that flattened them to their chairs. Ah! They all screamed what they could, horrified by how incredibly fast they were moving, and the mystery of how it was possibly being done. While they were moving, speed unchanging, a figure appeared before them. He was entirely unaffected by the velocity at which they currently traveled, and stayed a permanent 3 feet ahead of them. It was a slightly older man, dressed in a full suit, with combed hair and pearly white teeth. "Hello, gentlemen." His voice was also unaffected by the motion, perfectly reaching into their ears. "Today, this ride will take you to the 4th dimension. It will show you things that could have been, could have happened to you, had the circumstances for your lives not been exactly the same. Now, where shall we start?" His smile grew wider than his face, his teeth doubling, tripling in count, now spanning across the same length of his shoulders, partially covered by his lips. "That looks like a good place. I hope you enjoy it." With a wave of his hand, their terrified faces washed away. They awoke, standing in a shimmering savanna. The waist-high golden grass was swaying in the calm but intermittent breeze, and the sun was high above their heads. The sky was blue and devoid of clouds, reaching as far as the eye could see. They were heading in the direction of a watering hole that lay off in the distance, wrapping around a tall forest that lay to their left. It cast a nice shadow from the large canopy, formed from leaves that spanned almost as large as a single person. None of them questioned how it was happening. It was as if they had always been doing this. "Look at that!" Nick yelled. He was moving his arm to highlight something that was swooping down past them in the air. It was gigantic, and it was a leathery-looking bird with a long beak. "Was that a pterodactyl? We have to go see it," Joe said, rushing up ahead towards the watering hole, its assumed destination. The other two picked up the pace to follow him. "Hudson, you didn't tell me this free trip to a nameless island you won had dinosaur viewing on the itinerary," he called back behind him. Hudson thought for a minute. "I guess I didn't know either. Let's go see them." None of them questioned the impracticability of it, as if there was no reason they wouldn't win a free trip to a mysterious island full of dinosaurs. When they caught up to Joe, they had arrived at the watering hole. They weren't the only ones to arrive either. Out of the woods lumbered apatosauruses, stegosauruses, and plenty of other grass-eating dinosaurs. They all made their way down the muddy slope into a shallow part of the water. The parade was a colorful display, with all sorts of scales and feathers to catch their eyes. All of the different dinosaurs stayed in their own groups, the whole scene reminiscent of an African wildlife documentary. "That's so cool," Joe said. "There's some stegosaurus over there. I have to go see him." "All right, let's do it then," Nick said. Nick and Hudson walked over, looking at everything they were passing by for the time being, as they watched Joe inspect the animal. At first, he stood there for a moment, sizing it up, walking around it as it continued to drink water, and eventually he went up to pat it on the side. He took a careful couple strokes before he laid his hand on its side. "I don't know if you should get that close," Hudson called out. Then, to Nick, he continued, "At least I certainly wouldn't." Still a short distance away, Nick and Hudson watched as the beast thrashed its tail and struck Joe right through the chest with a giant spike. "Oh God!" Hudson said, stopping in his tracks. Nick didn't say anything, but his jaw dropped open, and he paused a second before taking off towards Joe. The Stegosaurus pulled its tail back and wandered off to continue drinking, leaving Joe slumping over. He fell on the ground as Nick arrived at the spot. He looked right at Joe as he laid on the ground. "What'll we do?" Nick asked, still in shock. "I don't know. I can't believe my favorite dinosaur would do that to me." Joe coughed a few times before continuing. "I don't know, man. This sucks. I'm probably gonna die." He looked down and saw a giant hole in his chest. Just then, out of the woods came hurtling 12 fang-bearing velociraptors. They must have smelled the blood, and they worked to cut through the crowd of scurrying dinosaurs. Right before they reached Nick, Hudson, and Joe, the scene ended. Like awakening from sleep paralysis, Nick, Joe, and Hudson all found themselves back in the flying chairs. The figure before them had disappeared, and the speed of the chairs had slowed greatly, but they were still moving through an inhospitable darkness. "What was that?" Hudson asked, looking at the other two of them. "I have no idea. It felt so real, like we were really playing it out," Joe said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Why didn't we realize there was no way we could have been seeing dinosaurs?" Nick asked, still shook up from facing certain death. Before they could continue their conversation, they woke up, yet again in a new, unfamiliar situation. "Hey Hudson, you mind passing me the sabiki rig?" Nick pointed behind him to the rack at the rear of the boat. It was a 26-foot-long fishing vessel, equipped for some prime fishing a couple miles off the coast. "Of course," Hudson said, picking up the fishing rod and handing it over. "Thanks," Nick said, immediately dropping the line down into the water. Joe walked around from the front of the boat. Man, we gotta be the worst fishermen in the world. I mean, I know we have Dad's luck for catching fish, but we're out here on a supermoon in the middle of the night. I thought we'd at least catch something now. Hey, we're catching plenty of mackerel, Hudson said, correcting them about their fishing efforts. Yeah, but those are all the bait fish, and nothing takes them once we put them on the real fishing lines, Joe said. Look, I think that if we just stay out here for a little longer, we'll get some good stuff. It's not supposed to rain or anything, we can just enjoy the waves for now. Nick's words seemed to mollify the crew, and everyone turned to their selected spots. Hudson at the aft, Nick on the starboard side, and Joe at the stern. Hudson stood there, looking out at the ocean and the horizon, the rolling waves gently swaying them, the moonlight that danced from the tops of them, the wispy gray clouds that floated here and there. He was clutching a fishing rod, looking out when he began to feel sick, not to his stomach, but in his mind. Suddenly he realized something. Hey Nick, where'd you get this boat? He turned around to pursue the question that now burned in his mind for some reason. What are you talking about, man? We've always had this. He was making a blank face, and Joe came around the corner to listen to this discussion. No, I swear, this isn't your boat. You don't have a fishing boat like this. You have a... Hudson struggled to think of the name. A grumman, that's what it is. Joe seemed to realize something at the same time, and he started muttering. Aluminum, 14-foot long, with aftermarket oar locks, 3.5 horsepower, 4-stroke motor, and the Grumman manufacturing name painted on the side. Yeah, we do have that boat, don't we? He seemed puzzled by realizing this. Well, we have a lot of boats. I mean, we have a canoe as well, Nick said, but I don't remember having that one. He kept on jigging the sabiki out of impatience while it sat, far below, attracting something. Oh, look at that. They all watched as Nick reeled in the line. There's something here. Some mackerel that want this, I suppose. They stopped the conversation to see what he was reeling in, but the thought still dwelled in their minds. Eventually, Nick pulled up the rig, a single line from which 8 or so little lines sprang out right at the foot, each with a small hook. On it was no mackerel, but there was something flopping around as Nick set it on the deck. Whoa, what is that? Hudson asked, shuddering as Joe poked it with his finger. It doesn't take a marine science degree to say this is an octopus, Hudson, Joe jested. Octopus vulgarius, Nick said, bending at the knees to examine it. But just an arm, I guess, or the tip of one. He picked it up. I say, return it to the sea, Joe said. I agree, Hudson said. All right, fine, Nick said as he threw it overboard. Something inside of Hudson's mind panged against his skull. Wait, I can't forget this. You guys don't have this boat. You have a grumman, a canoe, and maybe some other stuff, but this isn't yours. Where did you get it? Hudson refused to drop the subject. Nick gave him an annoyed stare. I don't know what you're talking about. You've always had this. No, you haven't. Hudson was struck with yet another unusual thought. What were we doing before this? I mean, before we got on the boat? I don't know, maybe looking at the tide chart or driving here or... Nick stopped talking, joining Joe in pondering. Why can't I remember? I feel like there's a reason, and I have to know it. I just can't quite scratch this itch in my brain, Hudson carried on. I don't think we were doing anything before this. Like, I can't remember what we would have been doing just 10 minutes ago. And Hudson's right, this definitely isn't our boat. So, and where are we? We have no clue because we're just in the ocean with no bearing. Joe was starting to sound a little frustrated when it all came back to Hudson. Like a rushing flood of memories, he suddenly knew what they had been doing prior to this. You guys, this isn't real. We're still on that 4D ride. Suddenly, they could all remember it clearly now. You're right, Nick said, almost yelling because of how surprised he was to realize. That means we're in a horror world, so something bad is gonna happen to us, Nick continued. Just then, Joe's fishing rod, which was just barely in sight, began bending. So what do? Hudson asked them, not paying any mind to the fishing rod that Joe had. I don't know, but I'm gonna reel that in right now, Joe said, stomping over and grabbing the ever-bending rod. It had almost turned into a U-shape as the tension on it drew tighter. Whatever you do, don't reel that line in, Nick said. Joe slowed down, but continued to pick up the rod and fight with it for a second. Oh, but there's something big on here, and I can't let that go. Just think about it. This is like a horror movie, and we just caught a little piece of an octopus. That means we could be catching like a giant one. It would totally eat us. Don't pull it up, Joe, Hudson said. Now that makes a lot of sense. However, this is too good to be true, Joe grunted, reeling in the line little by little. Nick, we have to stop him, Hudson cried out. Nick was standing there, scratching his chin. I'm not sure. I mean, he could be pulling up a big fish, and that would probably turn our luck around. I think I'm just gonna let this play out. He seemed calm in saying it. What don't you understand? This is like a horror movie. It's gonna kill us, Hudson tried to reason with them. Maybe, but Hudson, answer me this. I thought you were supposed to be the one that doesn't get scared, Nick said quietly, pointing at Hudson. Suddenly, through the gentle waves broke a giant pink angry octopus. It was massive, larger than the boat, its waves shaking them all around like sardines in a can. As it surfaced, it let an earth-shattering cry that shook them to their cores. Great. See what you've done, Hudson said annoyedly. Right after he said that, a giant tentacle-covered arm swept over the boat, knocking the cabin roof off. And then another one came, picking him up and whisking him into the air. See, Hudson called down to them. Well, I guess he was sort of right, Joe said, setting down a snapped rod and walking over to Nick. Well, what do we do? I mean, look at that thing. I don't think there's anything to be done, so as the captain of this ship, I will be going down with it. So as long as I don't have to go into any cold water, that is. Two more angry arms grabbed them, and now all three of them were being waved around in midair as more arms battered and cracked their boat in half. Well, Joe cupped his hands to yell to the others, last time we just had to die to go back to the ride, so maybe that'll happen again. Let's hope, Hudson screamed as he got lowered into the giant beak of the monster. In an instant, all three of them were back in the chairs. They were stationary now, as if suspended in an endless dark room. Well, now I can tell the people in advanced sea time that I've seen a giant octopus before, Nick said in a dismissive tone. We have to get out of here. I don't think I could take another one of those, Hudson said, starting to panic again. I think my key is sharp enough to cut through the seatbelt. I'm gonna get out of here, man, Joe said, already trying to slice the belt. He kept sawing away while they sat there until finally it snapped. Oh, you did it! Hudson was very excited to know that there was a way out. Here, you two can have this. I'm jumping, Joe said as he started to shuffle to the front of the chair. Into the darkness? But there's nothing out there. You get left behind, Nick asked, already beginning to cut his lap belt. Well, so be it. Better than doing this for the rest of my life. With that, Joe stood up and raised one leg, falling into a long step forward. As soon as his second foot left the chair, he disappeared entirely, vanishing into the air. Where did he go? Hudson asked. Nick paused what he was doing and looked around. They were silent for a moment, waiting for something to change. Suddenly, into the seat appeared Joe, as if he had just dove onto it. You guys aren't gonna believe this. We've never left the room. The illusion totally wears off when you leave the seat. Hurry up, let's get out of here. Nick and Hudson finished cutting their lap belts before the three of them stepped off the chairs, the dark void that surrounded them immediately being replaced by the familiar, poorly constructed tent. I can't believe it. How did it seem so real? Hudson asked. I don't know, but let's get out of here, Nick said, briskly walking off. The other two caught up and kept stride. Well, at least that's over, Joe said as they pushed through the exit tent. Should we, jump that guy for selling us tickets to that ride or something? It was an earnest question. Let's just go home, Nick said. Finally, they were outside, and the sounds and sights of the fair came back to them. I'm so glad that's over, Hudson said. From out of the sky dropped a massive red mallet. The striking face was as big as one of the food trucks and cast a shadow over the three of them. Noticing the lights from the rides weren't shining on them, they all looked up. It landed on all three of them, then fell over to one side. Great. Just great, Nick said. I ought to slap you for making us go on that ride, Joe. He went to raise his arm to do so, but it was paper thin now. They had been squashed flat. Normally, that would have killed us and we would have snapped out of this, Hudson said, pondering. But that didn't kill us. Does that mean we're stuck like this? A crowd started to grow around the three of them, pointing and taking pictures. Oh no, come on. I don't want to be paper forever, Joe yelled. No! That's the end of my story.
That was fantastic.
Thank you.
You had so many analogies in there too. I really like the one that stuck with me about the shaking the boat like a bunch of sardines.
Yeah, probably my favorite part was Hudson getting waved around in the air angrily.
It felt like a Goosebumps, like a Goosebumps like kind of story.
I thought they were all like really depicted well in that one too.
Yeah, I was hoping. I'm so old.
It's crazy.
So
how
cool. I didn't know if I should like stop and we should build a fire.
I
I
thought
a shirt that says Hudson was right.
Does September not have a 31st?
Negative.
That's crazy.
Jack, did you know this?
Is it a fire?
But just one in the garden.
Let's see.
What'd you say?
I got an idea, I think.
All right, I'm up. My terror tale this year is titled A Matter of Time. The cool air chilled us as we walked down the dark road, fallen leaves crunching beneath our feet. Sorry about my uncle, Hudson sighed. He can get a bit carried away with the spirit of the holiday and all. It's cool, man. I wasn't even all that scared, really, Joe lied dismissively. Gotta say, I was impressed, Nick said. When you said your parents were throwing a Halloween party, I imagined it would just be a couple of their friends hanging out drinking cider. But I was wrong. They really went all in. Costumes, decorations, a haunted walk, Uncle Steve manning the grill. That was awesome. I was surprised too, Hudson admitted. They don't usually get that into it. How much further to the playground, anyways? Joe shrugged. Not far. We're almost there. We marched single file down the side of the road, parading through the starless night. I was dressed as Kusakabe from Jujutsu Kaisen, wearing a tan trench coat, a tie, and carrying a katana. In front of me was Joe, wearing the gorilla suit that he had finally purchased after years of deliberation. And behind me was Hudson, dressed as Michelangelo of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. His orange headband flapped behind him as a light breeze brushed past us. Oh man, I can't wait to hit the slide, Joe cheered. We had left the party about 15 minutes earlier, opting to walk to a nearby playground after the urge to use the slide had struck us. But first, I gotta take a leak. Just give me a minute. Don't leave me here, he demanded. He was afraid of the dark and overall a big baby. Whatever, man, just make it quick, I said. He trudged off into the tree line. Should we leave him? Hudson asked, grinning devilishly. Sure, let's go, I agreed. We began to walk away when Joe shouted, Guys, come in here! You've got to see this! Hudson frowned. No way, man. I don't want to see what's going on in there. No, not that, Joe scoffed. Just come in here. Reluctantly, we pushed aside some branches and entered the woods, Hudson following my steps exactly so that he didn't step in mud or fall on his face. About 15 yards in, the trees opened up and left a clearing. Joe stood in the middle. Check it out, he said. He was surrounded by perhaps 24 uninscribed tombstones. Whoa, weird, I exclaimed. What a strange place for a cemetery, Hudson added nervously. Do you think it's some kind of pet cemetery or what? I asked. I don't know. These graves are pretty big, Joe noted. True, I nodded, shifting my attention to a statue bigger than me at the end of the cemetery. It depicted an angel, arms and wings spread wide. And what's up with that? It looks like it's frowning. Strange. Hudson added, Is it just me, or does it look like it has horns on its head? The statue, likely once white, was now weathered and wore patches of green moss. Okay, well you guys think about that. I just remembered I have to piss, so I'm gonna go do that. It will probably take a few minutes since I think I will have to take the whole suit off. Don't leave. Joe ran off past the statue further into the woods. A strong breeze ripped through the trees and leaves fell upon us. Despite the eerie presence surrounding us, Hudson and I chatted idly about anime and video games for a few minutes before Joe re-emerged from the tree line. He wore his full suit, including the mask. Why do you have your mask on? I asked. I'm surprised you didn't try to scare us, Hudson admitted. Joe took the mask off reluctantly. I guess I was in too much of a hurry to get out of there. Didn't want anything to get me. You know, it's a prime night for werewolves. Sure enough, I shrugged. Let's get going. Okay, he agreed. I peered at him briefly. Something seemed off, but I ignored it for the time being. We walked single file down the road once more, but this time I had taken the lead. We reached the entrance to the park and Hudson cheered, Finally! Under the streetlight, I looked at Joe again and noticed that he was now wearing a bowl cut. Before I could say anything, he cheered, Yippee! Let's go! And took off running towards the playground. I followed, racing towards the slide. Joe slid down first, then I went. As we caught our breath at the bottom, I asked, So what, did your hair get longer while you were in the woods? What? He responded, frowning. I gestured to his hair. The bowl cut. I thought you hadn't had that haircut for a few years now. Or do I just not pay attention? Before he could respond, Hudson arrived. What, did you walk? I asked. Yeah, he said. I didn't want to trip. I noticed almost immediately that his beard was missing. Hudson hadn't been smooth-chinned in ages. Something weird was going on here. They both stared at me, and then they looked at each other. The night was silent aside from a few crickets chirping in the distance. I felt my muscles grow tense. Suddenly I yelled, "Whoa, what was that?" and pointed over their shoulders. They both turned to look, and I bolted off in the other direction. I broke into the woods and felt them following me. Branches scraped my face as I sprinted blindly through the woods, numbed by adrenaline. I ran as fast as my feet could carry me, thinking only, I've got to get out of here. It wasn't even a thought, really, but an instinct. Then I tripped. I fell hard and slid in the dirty, fallen leaves. The breath was knocked out of my lungs. Still, I rose quickly and looked around. Ahead of me was a familiar landmark, the back of the statue we had observed earlier. I turned to see what I had tripped on. Joe's limp body, sprawled out unmoving in just a pair of boxers. That settled one thing. Those things following me were not Joe and Hudson. Not the ones I knew, at least. I strategized quickly. I didn't want to lead them to my house. I could keep running and call for help, but they were close behind me. I didn't have much time. Joe would come first, then Hudson a bit behind. This was assuming that their speeds were equal to the Joe and Hudson I knew. I could hide and ambush fake Joe. Then I could do the same to fake Hudson. I didn't have many other options. I hid behind a tree and waited, the sound of snapping branches and pounding feet approaching. Fake Joe emerged cautiously, scanning the area with his eyes. As he stepped carefully over real Joe's body, I bolted out from my hiding place and threw both of my arms around his neck, pulling tightly. He thrashed, slamming the back of his head against me. I tucked my chin and bore it until, to my amazement, he began to pry my grip loose. He shouldn't have been able to do that. Was this Joe stronger than the one I knew? Panicking, I began to knee him harshly. We grappled until I felt a hand on my shoulder. I had taken too long. Fake Hudson pulled me off of Fake Joe with boorish strength. I stumbled back and scurried away to a position where I could see them both. They stared at me intently as I fought to catch my breath. My mind raced. Suddenly, a thought occurred to me. Whatever these imposters were, why were Joe and Hudson the only ones? Then I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head and my vision went black. Anybody else want a root beer? Joe asked over his shoulder as he walked across the yard away from us, headed for the cooler on the other side of Hudson's house. Sure, thanks, Hudson replied. I looked around, my head spinning. We were in Hudson's front yard playing basketball. It was familiar. I noticed his Ninja Turtle costume. This was Hudson's parents' Halloween party. Hadn't we already been here? I felt intense deja vu. This had already happened. If my memory was correct, then any second now... Ah! Joe screamed, falling backwards and landing on the ground, both hands to his heart. What was that? Laughing maniacally, Hudson's Uncle John extended a hand to help Joe up. The prankster was dressed as a vampire clown, wearing makeup, a wig, and a red clown nose, in addition to fake vampire teeth and a Dracula-style cape. Hudson hurried over to them. What happened? He asked. Joe, rising to his feet in his gorilla costume, pointed an accusatory finger at Uncle John. He jumped out from around the corner and grabbed me! John continued to laugh shamelessly. Hey, how about you take it easy, Hudson said to his uncle, mildly annoyed. Sorry, boys, John wheezed. I just can't help myself this time of year. He walked away chuckling. It was exactly how I remembered it. Everything. This had happened before. Which meant, what had happened to me? I tried to remember. Oh man, I wish you guys had a slide here, Hudson, Joe said as they returned. He was pretending that he hadn't just been on the ground screaming a minute before. You are so right, Hudson said. I could go for a slide so bad right now. Gulping his root beer, Joe decided, let's go to the playground. They got slides. Are you allowed to use the playground in the middle of the night? Hudson asked. I think so, Joe shrugged. Okay, let's do it then, Hudson agreed. I was too distracted to chime in. Next thing I knew, we were walking down the side of the road, single file towards the playground. Sorry about my uncle, Hudson sighed. He can get a bit carried away with the spirit of the holiday and all. I paid little attention to the conversation as I racked my brain desperately for something that was rubbing at the borders of my memory. I gotta take a leak. Just give me a minute. Don't leave me here, Joe demanded. Should we leave him? Hudson asked, grinning devilishly after Joe had left. Sure, let's go, I shrugged absently. We began to walk away when Joe shouted, Guys, come in here! You gotta see this! There was some bickering before we complied. Hudson and I entered the forest and found ourselves in some sort of hidden cemetery. My attention was instantly drawn to the tall statue of the angel at the end of the cemetery, and then I remembered it all. I rubbed the back of my head, which suddenly ached. Joe said something about going off to take a leak and began to walk deeper into the woods. My heartbeat raced. "Wait!" I hollered, running after him. "Huh?" He turned to look at me. Over his shoulder I saw a pair of eyes shining. I grabbed Joe's arm and pulled him back towards the cemetery. He resisted. "What are you doing? I gotta piss," he demanded. "We have to get out of here!" I shrieked. My tone must have convinced him, because the blood drained from his face and he took off running beside me. Both Hudsons looked shocked to see us running full speed at them. One wore a Michelangelo turtle costume, and the other a Dragon Ball t-shirt and a pair of shorts. I lowered my shoulder and trucked the Dragon Ball Hudson with all of my might. I was reminded of freshman year football practice, when I had tried to topple my giant friend Deontay in a similar fashion. I knew something was off about these doppelgangers. They were too tough. My shoulder connected and it hurt just as much as it had with Deontay. The difference was that this time, my target fell. Joe and I grabbed real Hudson by an arm, and we tugged him through the woods and out onto the road. "What's going on?" Joe demanded. "Doppelgangers. I don't know. Will kill us. Trust," I coughed, sore and out of breath. "Should we fight?" Joe suggested. "We'll lose," I assured him. "But we have the numbers," he argued. "No!" I started to say when another figure jutted out onto the road ahead of us. It was me, wearing an old navy sweater with round glasses. The fake me grinned evilly. We slowed to a stop as fake Joe and Hudson appeared behind us. We backed together. "Doesn't look like we have much choice now," Joe choked. "Okay," I breathed. "Everyone take yourself. But these guys are really tough. I don't know why." Hudson gulped loudly as they closed in on us. Then we broke off into one-on-ones. I threw a series of quick punches out at my opponent. He dodged or parried them effortlessly. This was fine. I expected him to be a good fighter. I just needed to get a read for his movement tendencies so I could find an opening to exploit. This goal in mind, I kept on the offensive. Eventually, he raised one arm slightly too early, and I tucked my punch in just below it, slamming him right under his ribcage. It was a firm, unguarded blow in a weak spot, enough to send most men to the ground. But of course, he didn't fall. He barely grunted before lunging forward, and the next thing I knew, I was playing defense. Only, it didn't last long. Turned out I was right in the first place. They were too strong. I guarded with both arms, and they were both broken within seconds. My thin hopes that someone would hop in and help me were shattered when I caught a glimpse of good Hudson on the ground. Joe was still up, it looked like, but he didn't seem in much shape to last long. Then, that was it. "That Uncle Steve sure knows how to grill a slab of meat, I'll tell you what," Joe declared. "You got that right, buddy," Hudson slapped his shoulder. "I'm gonna go grab a drink," Joe decided. "Anyone else want a root beer?" he asked over his shoulder as he walked away. I was sweating. This time, for some reason, I remembered. "Wait!" I called. "What?" Joe turned and asked. He and Hudson both looked at me quizzically. I swallowed hard. "You guys need to listen to me," I told them solemnly. "Okay, fine, but I'm getting a root beer first," Joe said and ran off. "What's going on?" asked a concerned Hudson. "We aren't safe. It's complicated." "Ah!" Joe screamed across the yard as Uncle John scared him witless and he fell to the ground. Soon we were gathered beneath the basketball hoop. "This is going to be hard to believe, but I need you to trust me. This isn't just one of those things that happened to me in my dreams that I thought was real. This is legit." I explained everything that had happened. Joe and Hudson both looked uncomfortable. "So we need to figure out what to do quickly before they kill us again," I concluded. "Okay, that makes sense," Joe said. "You have a plan?" Hudson asked. "What, that's it?" I raised an eyebrow. "You guys believe me?" "Of course, man. I mean, it's no crazier than that time you saved us from that labyrinth in the woods with the giant spiders and the guy who thought he was a minotaur," Hudson said seriously. "Wait, I thought that was a dream," I exclaimed. "Nope, that one was real." "Huh. Wow. That was a crazy night." I turned to Joe. "Yeah, something pretty similar to this happened to me before. You guys remember Zombie Hudson?" No," I admitted. "Yeah, I know you don't. So anyways, what's the plan?" We considered staying at the party where there were others, but there was just one major problem. We didn't know if this phenomenon was affecting other people or just us. We might be surrounded by imposters as we spoke. We couldn't know for sure. So we retreated home. We piled in the car, enchanted by Taylor Swift playing at a very low volume as I drove along the dark road in the opposite direction of the playground. There were far more deer in the road than usual, almost as if something was scaring them out of the woods. When we reached home, we filed into the basement and pulled out the whiteboards. We had to know what was going on. We brainstormed. Doppelgangers, shadows, shapeshifters, skinwalkers. Hudson seemed to hate this idea the most. We strongly considered a classic cursing. We made a breakthrough around midnight. "That's gotta be it," Joe agreed. "Aw, man," Hudson sighed. "Does that mean it's my fault?" "No, Hudson, it's not your fault. It's my fault, if anything, for falling into that time portal. But really, it's all of our faults, so let's not worry about that." When we went back in time, we must have gunked something up fierce. I don't know how it would have happened, but that would explain why the imposters seem to be versions of us from 2 years ago. Do you think we created some sort of glitch? Or like an unsanctioned timeline, Joe asked. Maybe. Hard to say. I felt a chill run up my spine and I stood. Do you guys feel like we're being watched? Yes, Hudson said quietly. Joe grabbed the mallet next to him. We all armed up and watched tensely, sweat dripping and muscles quivering in anticipation. We remained that way all night until we realized we had made it to the next day. We decided to bring another head into this project. If our theory that we messed up by traveling to the past was correct, that would mean that there was a good chance that we might potentially be the only ones in danger after all. We were tired by the time we decided this. Regardless, we called the producer. Shockingly, Aiden wasn't doing anything important, so he came over. We explained everything to him as best we could. He listened with a straight face and nodded throughout the whole story, then immediately began speculating once we finished talking. Okay, you should be good. The attacks have only started once you encounter the imposters on Halloween night in that cemetery, right? That is the trigger. Now that you have lasted to the next day, their window is probably closed. Beings that don't belong in this timeline won't be able to last here for very long. You probably outlasted them already. They should be gone. Are you sure? I asked. Yes, I'm positive, he assured us. Aiden stuck around, and that night James and Katrina came over for a fire. We explained to them what we had been going through. I couldn't tell for certain if they thought we were lying, but it didn't matter all that much if the threat was gone now anyways. James and Hudson jumped on the trampoline. What? Katrina asked. Huh? I said. Then I realized I'd been staring right over her shoulder at a swaying bush behind the garden. Oh, sorry. I was just looking past you at, nothing. Despite Aiden's words, I still felt paranoid. I couldn't get past the feeling of eyes following me. In the morning, Hudson clutches up with free Dunkin' drinks, and he, Joe, and I head over to the beach to check on my 3x3 plot for invertebrate zoology class. I'm keeping a journal and taking photos of every species that enters the plot I picked throughout the semester, checking once a week. It was a windy November day, but I still had to go check the plot. There was nobody else on the beach, which was weird. There were always at least a few people running or walking their dog. It was low tide, and we walked down on the hard sand towards the rock wall where I'd picked my plot. Joe climbed up on the rock wall and walked around while I inspected my plot. Hudson sat back on the soft sand and sketched his surroundings. Whoa! Joe hollered. Then I heard a splash. He was gone. Joe? Joe! Where are you? I was frightened that he had fallen into the water. I clambered up onto the rocks to see if he was on the other side. I looked over the edge and jumped a mile when I came face to face with bowl-cut Joe on all fours, climbing the other side. Ah! I screamed. I jumped down from the rocks. Hudson was gone. Then, suddenly, fake Hudson jutted up out of the tall grass in the dunes. I bolted. I was already outnumbered, but by now I knew that fake me was around here somewhere too. Fake Joe and Hudson were right behind me. I ran as fast as I could, down by the water where the sand was hard. My goal was the car. If I could get to the car... Out of the water dove fake me, sopping wet and covered in hives. He tackled me to the ground. Ah! Nice shot, Hudson, Joe said, eating his last piece of steak by the basketball hoop. That Uncle Steve sure knows how to grill a slab of meat, I'll tell you what, he declared. Stop everything and listen right now, I demanded, shaking myself out of a funk. I felt dizzy from the clarity of the transfer this time. And somebody call Aiden. He needs to hear this too. We met in the shop. Joe pulled the blue tarp off of a massive structure in the middle of the floor, revealing the time machine that he had built a while back. She still runs, right? I asked to clarify. Should work fine. So, we were going to go back in time, but how are we planning to fix everything? Hudson ventured. We will have to do some quick decision making based on what we discover once we get there, but essentially, we're going to go back to the part of the timeline that we interfered with to see what's up. Aiden will stay here and guard home base so that we don't have any problems returning. Right, about that, Aiden raised his hand. What am I supposed to do if all three of your doppelgangers show up here? And so, we called James and Katrina. We called Noah too, but he was too busy, apparently. Once they arrived, we fortified the shop. Okay, this is better, Aiden acknowledged. It's still not a winning fight for us, but I will definitely take a siege over straight combat. At that, we prepared to depart. Good luck in there, Katrina said. Try not to mess it up anymore, James added. He shook Hudson's hand. Then we entered the machine.
My stomach lurched like on a roller coaster, then dropped back into place suddenly. We stumbled out of the machine and found ourselves standing on top of a grassy hill in the middle of nowhere. A smooth-chinned Hudson stood in front of us, eating a ham sandwich. He lowered the sandwich and his eyes widened. Then a portal appeared between us and another Hudson sprang out. He was running full speed and barreled right through the other Hudson, sending him flying. Then he disappeared through another portal, just like that. Sandwich Hudson rolled roughly down the hill at an alarming speed, yelling, "Wah!" the whole time. Then he hit a bump and flew into the air. I grimaced in anticipation of his harsh landing, but instead, a purple portal appeared like a crack in the ground right where he landed. He disappeared through it. We all looked at each other. "Welp, I guess that's my bad after all," Hudson laughed sheepishly. "Let's go check it out," I shrugged. We walked down the hill towards the purple crack. "That sure does look like our glitch," Joe decided.
He waved his hand over it a few times, then stuck his head through. Holy! You guys are going to need to see this, he said. Then he dove through the portal. We jumped in after him, shaking our heads. What we entered seemed to be some kind of high school gymnasium, and it was packed with people. Only, there was something strange about the people. Aren't these all us? Hudson asked. Looks like it, I agreed. The gym was packed with different variations of ourselves. I spotted bodybuilder MCS, esports MCS, French MCS, clown in training MCS, animated MCS, pirate MCS. There must have been more than 100 variants of us in the room. Joe walked up to an MCS team wearing overalls and straw hats. "Hey, Joe, right?" he asked the one on the right. "Actually, it's Joe wrong if you ask my wife." He chuckled. "Farmer MCS, what can I do for you, partner?" They shook hands. "What's everybody doing here, pal?" "Oh, we're just waiting for our turn. Science MCS is going to make us superior beings, I guess. Whatever helps the harvest, am I right?" He grinned. "Right you are. So, where are they at?" "They're down in the science lab at the end of the hallway. They're meeting with regular MCS2 right now." "What unit are you with, anyways?" "Oh, right, my bad. Joe, regular MCS4, he gestured to himself. "No way! I'm a big fan of your work. You boys have done some great stuff for the community." "Well, if you need anything, I'll be over yonder with Medieval Knight MCS. Take care, brother." Joe returned to the group. "So, you guys heard all that?" "Yeah," I said. "So we've got to get over there and see what kind of junk Science MCS is up to." We shuffled towards the exit when Hudson, wearing a camo jacket and a cap, said, "Hey, you boys aren't trying to cut now, are you?" and spit on the ground. "Of course not," Hudson told him. "Just using the can." "Roger that, brother, my apologies," Hunter Hudson said, patting Hudson on the arm. We ran down the hallway towards the science lab. The door was closed, so we peered through the window. Inside, we saw ourselves wearing lab coats and safety goggles. Also there were ourselves, the same ones that had been attacking us in our own present, strapped into chairs. Science Joe held a frightening-looking syringe with a long needle on the end. I kicked down the door and we burst in. "Stop!" I yelled. "What is the meaning of this?" Science Hudson roared. The whiteboard behind them read Science MCS, but just above it was the clear remnants of where the word evil used to be written and had remained for a very long time. "Oh no," I exclaimed. "This isn't just Science MCS. This is Evil Science MCS." "What?" Nick from regular MCS2 exclaimed. "No, man. They're just going to make us super strong and stuff." "No, man. They're going to make you mad evil, too," I explained. "Why would they do that?" he asked. "Because they're Evil Science MCS. You're being duped." Regular MCS2 Joe said, "Huh. Well, now that you mention it, this situation is rather sinister." "Say, Joe, you wouldn't inject me with evil juice, would you?" Evil Science MCS Joe looked away and started whistling. "Help! Get us out of here!" Regular MCS2 Joe called. With a flying roundhouse kick, I launched the syringe from Evil Joe's hand. "How did you find us out?" Evil Nick demanded. "Wait a minute. You must be... This is the original MCS! How did they get here?" "Whoa, you guys are the originals?" MCS2 Nick asked as I unlatched his wrist holds. I guess so." "Stop them!" Evil Nick yelled. Evil Joe and Hudson charged at us. Good Joe and Hudson covered me while I tried to free the MCS2 team. Then, Evil Nick started laughing menacingly. I looked up to see him holding a beaker full of angry-looking solution just before he threw it at me. I dodged it, and it shattered on the floor, filling the room with a red smoke that hurt my eyes. I couldn't see a thing. Then I felt a foot in my ribcage. I grabbed the leg and yanked, and he fell over. Then someone else kicked me. I rose to my feet and grabbed him, throwing him over a chair. Next thing I knew, it was an all-out brawl. I couldn't see a thing the whole time. A minute of relentless, blind beating went on until I drop-kicked someone into a switch that turned the ceiling vent on. The smoke dissipated almost immediately. I scanned the room with my guard raised. First, I saw Evil Joe on the ground sprawled out. Then, MCS2 Joe standing next to him, breathing heavily. Then there was the original Hudson and MCS2 Hudson, both strangling each other with two hands. They released their grips and brushed each other off. Then there was MCS2 Nick standing in a corner facing a wall with his guard up. Then there was original Joe holding evil Hudson in a full Nelson. Then there was evil Nick lying on the floor in a very unnatural position. It was him I had kicked. I coughed up some smoke and cleared my throat. Well, all right then. Good work, boys. We high-fived all around and tied up Evil Science MCS. We delivered them into the hands of law enforcement MCS and prepared for our return trip. Thanks for saving us, you guys, regular MCS2 Hudson said. Yeah, seriously. Who knows what would have happened if we'd become all evil and super strong. We might have tried to hunt you guys down and become the originals ourselves or something, regular MCS2 Nick said. Glad we could avoid that, I told him. It's been a real pleasure meeting you guys. Everyone here is super cool. For real, Joe agreed. Honestly, Hudson nodded. We grabbed a ladder from the janitor's closet and used it to climb through the rift in the ceiling that we had come through. Then, we hiked back up the hill to our time machine and went home. We landed in the shop to find Aiden asleep in a chair holding a baseball bat. Katrina was sitting at a table, working on the puzzle, and James was sawing a bunch of pieces of wood in half for no reason. Hey, you're back, Katrina acknowledged. How was the trip? James asked. Joe slapped the back of Aiden's head and he woke up. It was crazy, I said, but I think we solved our issue. Those guys have no reason to come for us anymore. They aren't evil now. They're actually super cool guys. Aiden rose and scratched his chin. That's good. That's very good. However, I don't think the problem has reached its end. When it comes to glitches, the typical rules of linear time travel don't apply, he speculated. What are you saying? Joe asked. I'm saying that I think the evil ones are still out there. If you take care of them, they shouldn't come back. But we can't just leave them out there, or they will still wipe you out. Oh man, Hudson frowned. Do you think I will still come back if I get whacked this time? I asked. Good question. I'm not sure. I think you will, though. I think your power comes from excessive exposure to unnatural time-space phenomena, mainly resulting from your time in that time portal. Hopefully we don't need to find out, though. Good point. So, do we just wait for them to show up? Hudson asked. Nah, I'm sick of waiting around here, James said, raising his saw. Yeah, he's right, Joe said. Waiting them out is too tedious. We have lives to live. All right, I shrugged. Everyone gear up. Let's go hunting. The three of us arrived at the cemetery dressed to scrap. I wore a cut-off shirt, good sneakers, and a headband. Joe wore his Death Kwon Do outfit, and Hudson his finest gym clothes. I nodded to Joe, and he walked off past the angel statue into the woods. Just as I expected, I saw eyes peering through the bushes in the distance. Hudson and I watched from a safe distance. We didn't want to invite the other two to jump in just yet by getting too close for comfort. Joe turned his back to the eyes, and Imposter Joe bolted out towards him. Just before he reached Joe, Aiden sprung out from behind a tree and bashed the imposter in the head with a baseball bat. He fell hard to the ground, and Aiden hit him again. Joe turned and started kicking him aggressively. This went on for a while. It seemed like overkill, but these guys were seriously tough. Evil Science MCS had a real dangerous concoction on their hands. We hadn't been able to defeat one yet, so we had to make sure it was done. Once it was, Joe apologized. Forgive me, Joe of regular MCS2. It should never have been this way. The four of us walked to the playground next. For the same reasons, we ran off and left Hudson a fair distance behind us. Instead of playing on the slide, though, we listened carefully. A bush rattled, and we turned. The second Hudson crept up behind original Hudson. James ran from the baseball dugout and Katrina from behind the batting cage. We let the three of them handle it. It was quick and businesslike. That left one. We had never actually seen where Evil Nick came from. Excluding the beach attack, he had shown himself somewhere near the cemetery, though, just later than the others. And so, we walked 6 wide down the road towards the cemetery. I expected him to ambush us, but an ambush didn't come. This concerned me. How long would he be willing to wait us out, looking for the right moment to strike until he could get us one by one? We couldn't let that happen. We pulled out the thermal detector and searched up and down the road. I racked my brain. Where would I hide if I were Evil Nick? Then, I realized it was obvious. Check the trees! I hollered, almost too late. He came down right on me, knocking the wind from my lungs. Joe kicked him off me and James and Aiden swarmed him. I fought to regain my breath, head spinning. Hudson grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet. The other 4 had him surrounded. I wheezed. I'm sorry, Evil Nick. We've already saved you in the past, but today it's you or me. He nodded and inhaled deeply. Then he struck. He fought like a storm. Wild, harsh, unpredictable. No one could get a hold of him as he let out a barrage of punches. "Grab him," Katrina yelled. "We gotta stop his movement." Joe got a hold of his arm for a second, just long enough for Aiden to get a hold on his leg. Katrina put an arm around his neck and James pulled out a knife. Then, Evil Nick hoisted Joe off the ground and hurled him overhead at James. They both fell. As Hudson rushed, Evil Nick grabbed Aiden by the head and tossed him. He tried to shake free of Katrina. She lost her footing, but she held on. I tackled his legs and he fell, landing in the leaves off to the side of the road. He struck Katrina's chin with the back of his head and her grip loosened. He rolled over and lunged towards me. I held him at arm's length as he reached for my throat. I saw headlights coming down the road. It was a big black pickup truck driving right over the yellow lines in the middle of the road. I brought my knees to my chest, feet leveled with his ribcage, and launched as hard as I could. He flew into the road, barely landing on his feet. He stumbled back 2 steps, off balance, then was struck by the truck and went soaring. I climbed to my feet and ran after him. There he lay, crumpled on the ground. It was over. The truck driver rolled down their window. "Well, well, well, if it isn't Huddy and the boys," Sean said to Hudson. "And is that Katrina? What are you hooligans up to tonight, huh? Sean, you really ought to be more careful. You could kill somebody. You just did, actually. You killed me," I said. Not paying attention, he said, "You guys want to ride? I've got to go pick something up from your house for the dog." We all climbed into the bed of his pickup truck and felt the cool air against our skin on the ride home. "You guys want to watch a movie when we get back?" Hudson asked. "Let's watch the Breaking Bad movie," James suggested. "No, let's watch a scary one," Aiden requested. "I've been scared enough already. Let's watch a Peanuts special, or maybe a Ghibli movie," I said. "I agree. I want something light," said Hudson. Katrina mentioned, "I still haven't seen Totoro." "Ooh, Totoro!" Joe cheered as the truck engine roared into the cool, still night. The end. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh.
Well. So the guy who watched like 12 time travel anime wrote a time travel story. You know, I should have seen that coming in the first place.
figured that.
I was going to title it MCS Rendering, but I don't want to fully give it away.
All I'm saying is there's no way they should have made it past the first night. I mean, like, come on. It just defies the laws of physics. But other than that, great story, Nick. Great story, Joe. Great story, Hudson.
Thank you, Aiden.
I like Farmer Joe.
I think you like Farmer MCS.
I also like that I had like a comprehensive like knowledge of time travel and built a time travel machine.
This was obviously kind of building off of the narrative that I built for the Nick and Time video
Yes.
on the Mustache Cash Dash channel.
Yeah. So anyways, if you're still here, thanks a lot. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoy this spooky season and have a happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Should we do a synchronized one?
Probably. Yes.
Yeah. 2, 3, 1.
Happy
Halloween!
Make sure to like and subscribe, guys.
Ooh,
Also,
good.
leave a comment. Tell us which one was your favorite story.
And
If
you know
you're feeling
what?
real crazy, go ahead and hit that bell.
Maybe even consider writing your own story too. Feel free to share.
We'd love to read it.
All right.
Thanks, viewer.
Viewer.
Thanks,
Actually, you know what?
James Lady.
Thanks to you, viewer. Yeah, you. The one watching right now. You.
And if you like this
Not any of the
video,
other ones, just you.
and if you like this video, feel free to watch some of our other Terror Tales videos.
We have volumes 1 and 2 out right now.
And look forward to volume 4 next fall.
All right, let's cut it now.
I will collect the microphones.
Oh yeah, the guy wants the mics. Get the guy the mic.